Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday. What is it? January 8th, 2021. Already losing track of time in the, I don't know what you would call it. It's not, what is it anyway? It is 2021. I was saying earlier, it's still Trump 2021, not yet Biden 2021, but it's kind of not even Trump 2021 at this point. I don't know how we'll approach today. Once again, I guess we'll just stumble our way through it just like yesterday. It's another hell of a day. I would say it's Pence 2021 at this point. I would at this point advise a concurrent resolution beginning in the House declaring the presidency vacant at this point, and just add it as another layer to the already burgeoning calls for invoking the 25th Amendment and calling for impeachment. Big movement in yesterday's, or in developments yesterday, and one of them, I guess, just completely distracted me from putting up a morning post in the radio group over at Daily Kos, which is the usual guide for everybody to find the live show. But thanks, Bill, for realizing what was going on and giving everybody a link to click through. I don't even now thinking back, I mean, it's now such a haze. I can't even remember whether I wrote the post, much less scheduled it. I guess I can check on that and check on things. And if I've had one in the queue, I can let it go and push it out for those of you to find it. But otherwise, basically, I guess I'll tell you this. Well, if you're already listening to the show, what's the point, right? Honestly, I guess that's it. So the rest of you who are listening, you can probably just grab the same link as we use every day and tweet it out. And I think that's what Bill actually did. I'm just trying to look and see. Did I even queue a post? I might have just been so distracted yesterday that by the time evening rolled around, I didn't even put it together. Like, you got to prepare for tomorrow's show. So sorry about that. Well, I did prepare, at least in terms of putting together some small collection of stories yesterday, although the torrent of news, I think, outpaced my ability to put all these things in pocket. Yesterday was like I said, a very active day in terms of speaking among the principal movers who would actually put something in motion that at least stands a chance of removing Donald Trump as president, even though he only has, we're down to like 12 days left in the presidency. But I think we've obviously reached the stage where many people, not just, crazy people who scream at you on the radio or whatever, believe that it's just simply too dangerous to leave Donald Trump alone in office to finish out his days for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that he's clearly at least functionally unstable. I did notice something the other day. I'll throw it into the mix here. Well, maybe I'll wait for that part, but I guess part of what happened yesterday, the last I saw, the number stood at 112, which would make it a majority of the House Democratic Caucus have signed on to a call for impeachment. And it's now beyond call for impeachment. There are already impeachment articles drafted from several sources. I mentioned, I think yesterday, that Ilhan Omar was working on a set of impeachment articles, but now I think that that's officially underway at the House Judiciary Committee. Nancy Pelosi appears to actually be on board with this and is reportedly furious, obviously for good reason, with what went on at the Capitol. More detail emerging from the Pentagon, including today's Washington Post story with the headline, Pentagon placed limits on D.C. Guard ahead of pro-Trump protests due to narrow mission, which is a roundabout way of getting to the point that an attack was launched on an important American government installation essentially a terrorist attack in which 4 Americans died, and the military was ordered to stand down from dispatching protection to this important American government installation. And as a result, American lives were lost. I understand that a Capitol police officer, they went back and forth on this yesterday as to whether this person had died, but apparently, I think they've finally settled on that the fact that this police officer also now dead. So I guess 5 people dead. Some more details emerging about the medical emergencies that caused the death of 3 protesters, attackers, essentially, at the Capitol. And 1 or 2 of them were more, as you would expect, a stroke and a heart attack, probably caused by the activity itself. But now, actually, it perhaps put in a different light, apparently one of the deaths was of a woman that was crushed in the surge into the Capitol. So it may very well be that they find that the heart attack and stroke were likewise induced by the crush of this surge into some of these doors at the Capitol. And then, of course, there was the one woman who was shot climbing through the window by the side of the doors into the Speaker's lobby outside of the House chamber. And I've seen a couple of different videos of this now, because everybody was filming. You know, they were all, half of them were tourists, you know, in the sense that they had broken into and followed the crowds into the Capitol complex because, I don't know, people are going and it looked like it would be a really cool thing to do. There were others who entered with more pointed purpose, as we mentioned yesterday. The guy who was photographed climbing in the visitors' galleries at the Senate, carrying, I don't know what, some quantity of those plastic zip ties, armed with some cans of mace and what looked like, some people said, a sidearm as well, you know, wearing all his stupid tactical gear and everything. But that guy was particularly more reminiscent, and this is why you bring up the fact that, yeah, it was a terrorist attack. This one was equipped in the way that the gang that was plotting the kidnap of the Michigan governor was equipped. And really, zip ties into the Senate chamber. They clearly were there thinking that they were going to take someone prisoner. And it needs to be treated seriously. Anyway, as I was mentioned, just sort of rounding things up, lots of movement towards impeachment. Lots of movement toward, I guess in the outside we're all debating still what to call this thing, and there's really no good word for it. Even insurrection or insurgency just, I don't know, sort of has some sort of bravado to it that they really shouldn't be able to borrow. But still searching for the right term there. I was going to say, I saw the different videos of the woman being shot climbing through the door. The Speaker's lobby is, you know, just feet away from the doors to the House chamber. It's a pretty secure area. I'm not certain at what time she was climbing through and therefore shot, but it's pretty much someplace that you would expect Capitol Police and or Secret Service. There was some question about whether perhaps they were in the joint session at the time, and that, but I don't think that they were. At the time that the Capitol was breached, I think they had broken up into the 2 houses to debate things, but there was some possibility, had they been in the joint session, that the vice president would have been in the House chamber where these people were breaking into. I think the questions arise from the fact that the shooter, in this case, was in plain clothes, you know, but a jacket, you know, and tie, and so people thought that it might be Secret Service. And it might have been. I think we're still unclear on it. But there are apparently plainclothes officers dressed that way from the Capitol Police Force as well. And apparently the ones photographed inside the House chamber, barricading the doors and pointing their guns out the window. Which, again, if you were wondering, you know, whether that was really necessary, the woman who was shot just a few feet away, coming towards those doors. And then they did eventually breach those doors as well and get into the House chamber. But those officers who had guns drawn in the early released photos of what was going on inside the House chamber are apparently Capitol Police. But, it wouldn't surprise me if there was a Secret Service presence in the House chamber, even though the vice president wasn't there at the time. He was supposed to be moving back and forth between the Senate and the House chamber. Anyway, a couple of different angles on it, and I don't know. You can put more together. There'll be an investigation. I believe the officer who fired the shot is on administrative leave, which is routine. I don't know what to tell you. I don't want to pronounce it yet, but from all indications, it appears to be like, they were ordered to stop from coming into a highly secure area and didn't and got shot. And I don't know. I'm not even certain that the woman who was shot would say that that wasn't what she came there to do. She's one of those people that left behind some fairly fraught videos and messages about the necessity of laying down her life for this crazy thing that she believed. And, well, she did it. Anyway, I should focus probably more on the question of what to do with the guy who says he's president. I don't think he is. I think he's incapacitated. Apparently, he's incommunicado as well. They've had tremendous difficulty getting through to both Pence and the president as it happens. I'm a little concerned about the fact that they couldn't get through to Pence. Apparently, congressional leaders and others attempting to get through to Pence to talk to him about the 25th Amendment found that it was impossible to reach him. And that's sort of dangerous in and of itself. And I began to wonder, in this situation, your mind contemplates these things. How safe is the vice president? Is he in control of his own environment? Is he under house arrest in the Naval Observatory so that he won't invoke the 25th Amendment? You got to wonder about these things. And you wonder about the fact that he has now communicated to the rest of the national leadership that he has no intention at the moment of invoking the 25th Amendment, although honestly, if I had intent to invoke the 25th Amendment against someone like Donald Trump and I was still getting my ducks in a row, I would also say I had no intention of invoking the 25th Amendment. We'll actually have to wait and see what the day brings. But Trump himself, apparently, his chief advisors in trying to reach him and convince him that he needed to make some sort of public statement, both during the attack on the Capitol to try to get them to back off and afterwards to try to disavow the violence that ensued, have been unsuccessful and in fact were for a long time unable to reach him at all, including his chief of staff, which is amazing because they're in the same building, allegedly. I mean, again, last night I was asking the question, I found myself forced to ask the question, is Donald Trump alive? Is Donald Trump conscious? Is he incapacitated? Is he in the building? Is he in the country? I don't know where he is. They were announcing yesterday, and we'll see whether they follow through on it, that he was going to, like any other normal day, he was going to go off to Camp David this weekend, which he allegedly hates, which also sort of interesting that he would choose to do this. Very normal sounding announcement, I guess, that on a Friday at the end of his term, he might head up one more time to use the facilities there if he got any enjoyment out of them whatsoever. But no one could find him or communicate with him, or they had a press conference, allegedly, what they called a press conference yesterday, sent Kayleigh McEnany out into the press room for literally about 60 seconds, as I understand it, and taking no questions, just sort of mouthing words of, the president doesn't like the thing that happened or whatever, and he left. And word from those who claim to have gotten some sense of how he feels about the situation I don't know whether it's true or not, are saying that he did, in fact, disapprove of the violence, but actually, and this is what makes me believe maybe it really did come from Trump. He wouldn't actually condemn it. The word was that he didn't like the looks of it on television because he thought it looked low class, which, basically, honestly, what you ought to be telling the MAGA crowds, if they could even hear such a thing, is this is what the president always thinks of you. This is why you're down there and he's up here when he has one of those rallies where he says he loves all of you and would wander into the crowd and kiss you all. He thinks you look disgusting and low class, and I can't believe you haven't noticed that, but what can I tell you? That's where we are in this country. Yeah, and I don't know whether he gets over the fact that it looks low class if they're cheering for him enough. But that wasn't necessarily the message that came through in the pictures on his telly. So allegedly he didn't like it because it looked too low class. But I also saw reports this morning that, what's his name? I can't even remember. He's gone through so many chiefs of staff, I can't remember anymore. Chief of staff couldn't reach him and even tried to talk to Ivanka about getting help reaching him. And, hey, it didn't work. So, if you ask me, the presidency is vacant. You can't reach him. He can't act. His principal officers are abandoning him. Who else resigned yesterday? Elaine Chao said she was resigning, but effective on the 11th. I'm not certain what that's supposed to mean. Betsy DeVos said she's resigning. I mean, there's plenty left. And you should, by the way, somebody should track down some of these other people. Mnuchin and Wilbur Ross and probably Jared Kushner are probably just looting the ever-loving hell out of whatever they can grab and socking things away. I still think Mnuchin is just taking gold bars out of Fort Knox left and right, or something. Anyway, I'm sure they're stealing everything that isn't nailed down. But that does remind me, by the way, speaking of where is the president, where's Jared Kushner? I mean, has anybody seen Jared Kushner lately? This is the guy with the largest, broadest portfolio in the entire government. Every problem under the sun has been assigned to Jared Kushner. And by the way, we're still at a effing pandemic that by the end of this weekend, I guess by the end of today, we'll be at 375,000 people dead. We'll be I've been tracking, of course, the populations of cities, but it's been a long time since we've hit a city. This weekend will bring us to Aurora, Colorado, which is famous for being wiped out now and again. But, they can't reach the president. They can't get Ivanka to reach the president, or at least she's been unsuccessful in reporting back to them that she's reached the president. The principal officers are resigning. I don't know who's stealing what. Like I said, Kushner, has anybody seen him? I guess I would ask you, have you seen him since he snagged a pardon for his dad? Or was that like the end of his tenure in the White House? That was what he was there for the whole time. He got the pardon and then disappeared. I think he took a trip to Israel. Somebody told me that he was still there. And in fact, I'm now looking pretty prescient if he is in fact still there. The person said not only he's overseas, he's in the Middle East, he's in Israel. And I told you a long time ago that when the end came for the Trump administration, he would take a trip to Israel and not return. Distinct possibility as well, I suppose. By the way, I went so far yesterday as to say, I'll bet you Jared's gone, the kids are gone. I bet that house is empty and Ivanka is staying at the White House for the final couple of days, lest she missed the last helicopter out. And then I saw a report, I think, from Bloomberg News, middle of the afternoon yesterday, moving vans spotted outside of their D.C. home in the Colorado area. And, obviously they're going to be moving out of there at some point, I guess. But whatever. Now is a little bit early to see those. And then later reports after that, by the way, that it was just junk hauling and that they were getting rid of something and disposing of some stuff, and probably in preparation of vacating the house. But, who knows whether they're socking away stuff they've stolen from the executive mansion or documents that they need shredded. Who knows what it is? I guess, the more solid question out of all that is, though, Jared Kushner is supposed to be in charge of everything under the sun. And he too, incommunicado, but for like 2 weeks. And nobody discussing where he is or whether or not he's going to come back. I did a Google News search for him to see whether he was in fact still in the Middle East. There's no reports of that I could find, not in a quick search anyway. That he had been there was documented, but that was like 2 weeks ago. I don't know where is the most important senior advisor to the President of the United States, and his daughter can't reach him, yada, yada, yada. Also circulating yesterday, video taken by Donald Trump Jr., now, it was being circulated in what looked like they were trying to hint that it was the Trump inner circle in a tent outside the White House watching, having a party, basically, watching on video monitors the sacking of the Capitol building. But it actually looks to me like it is video that is taken moments before they began their rally on the ellipse that preceded the March to and sacking of the Capitol. But even so, what was more interesting about the video to me was that Donald Trump Jr. is wandering around, videotaping himself, ad-libbing a speech to his followers on whatever platform he was using at the time, and then taking video of his girlfriend Kim Guilfoyle dancing because they were playing music in the background. But over his shoulder, he's just sort of standing there and filming himself, and then over his shoulder at one point you can see, watching on the video monitors, there's Donald Trump and Ivanka standing next to him. And I thought it was interesting. He doesn't approach them at all or say, hey, Dad, hey, Ivanka, say hi to everybody, or anything like that. He just sort of stands there like a guy who, I think he knows his place. He's frozen out. He's on the periphery. This is his own dad and his own sister, and he's doing like a live video feed to excite Trump fans. And he doesn't even ask them to like turn to the camera and wave to people or anything like that. I thought that was really kind of odd. And of a piece, I guess, with the report that even Ivanka couldn't get them through to the president at any point. Where is that one? I think that was was that Axios reporting. Let me jump over into the Twitter feed and see, because I know I circulated this earlier on. I'm going to have to scroll down here a little bit, I think, to find it. But, yeah, here it is. Whose tweet is this? Kenneth Baer, who is tweeting about the New York Times piece from Peter Baker and Maggie Haberman, saying the White House Chief of Staff couldn't reach the president. The quote from the story: unable to get through to him, Mark Meadows, his Chief of Staff, I keep mixing him up with the Mick Mulvaney M guy, Mark Meadows, his Chief of Staff, sought help from Ivanka Trump. And I guess I should read you that we can read the piece and try and figure out what kind of help did he seek and what kind of help did he get. What's the title here? Capitol attack leads Democrats to demand that Trump leave office. Well, you know what? Rather than skim the piece at this point, I think we really just need to do a general look around at the various moving parts in all of this. But a lot of good reporting out there, or interesting reporting anyway. We'll see how good it is. Another New York Times piece widely read this morning: Senate being locked down inside a harrowing day at the Capitol, with some great photos, including those of members of the House putting on their escape hoods, lest there be either smoke from a fire set in the building or some sort of noxious gas released or whatever as part of a tear gas attack, or who knows whatever else might be released by people attacking the Capitol. Let's see. Washington Post piece on Democrats are drafting new articles or new impeachment articles. Inaction is increasingly untenable, is Greg Sargent's piece from yesterday. He apparently got an early look at the text of some of the articles of impeachment, and they are what you would expect them to be. Again, interesting and relatively narrow focus in these, but I think they intend to have them move quickly. But it looks like, at least in the articles he saw, that there's a sort of a two-track approach to it. The insurrection, the invasion, and the attack on the Capitol is just one of the two prongs of the Judiciary Committee's version of articles of impeachment. They also added a count that covers the phone call to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, which I thought somebody made an interesting comment to me as well, a discussion over Twitter about whether or not you should append those articles to the same articles about the Ukraine-focused impeachment. I think ultimately probably not the direction that they're going to go. It's a step that you don't need, for one thing. But I thought it would be interesting on a logical from a logical viewpoint, if not a practical or political viewpoint, to connect the Ukraine impeachment and the Ukraine activities to the call to Raffensperger, because it's the same activity, actually, using the power of the presidency to lean on somebody else to use their powers to benefit your reelection effort. And I guess in the case of Raffensperger, your effort to cheat having lost your reelection effort, but still basically the same idea, to remain in power and to manipulate the truth such that it looks like you have a more legitimate claim to power. Anyway, lots of officialdom inside the Congress calling for impeachment. Democratic senators very receptive to receiving those articles of impeachment. The problem is, even Chuck Schumer, though, saying we really ought to act on this. For whatever reason, they're saying primarily that they prefer the 25th Amendment solution and then failing that, impeachment. Or another view of it, a successful 25th Amendment procedure that would incapacitate Trump from the outside as opposed to his own physical incapacitation, but remove him from power pending their ability to remove him from office. It's a good combination at any rate, and it tells you, I guess, how high up it goes. Usually when you find people calling for impeachment at this point, you find the leadership sort of laying down suppressing fire, so to speak, trying to keep things under control. And there's still some indication that that's the case. Of course, the big problem with the impeachment route is that the two houses of Congress are in recess. And with what Congress will you impeach him? Apparently, though, the adjournment resolutions leave them with enough leeway that they could probably call themselves back into an emergency session of some sort before the 19th, which is where they're currently adjourned to. So that's hard to work around. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see, where shall we even pick up? Well, let's see. First of all, I guess I'll let you know, Kate Sherrill had shared with me a tweet from Jim Scuto. Is he CNN, is that right? Of course, I'm going to have to click in order to do it. Yeah, CNN anchor and chief national security correspondent. Breaking news, anyway, back at 8 o'clock, an hour and a half ago. But breaking news, Assistant House Speaker Catherine Clark tells CNN the House will move forward with impeachment votes beginning next week, apparently. I guess they're staying adjourned at this point. I don't know why exactly. Questionable in terms of whether or not they ought to be waiting at all. But it is, I don't know. I mean, in the middle of it all, are they really saying, well, it's Friday? But I guess there's logistics, of course, in getting members of the House back. But they did pass the remote voting rules. But I don't know how they will feel about handling an impeachment with mostly remote votes at this point. They should just call everybody back, quite honestly. I don't know what they're waiting for. But maybe they feel like they need the time to settle and get their heads around things and have the legislative council and the lawyers looking at the drafting of the documents that they're doing. So, maybe that means some Tuesday meetings and a Wednesday vote, which is not awful. But again, as people are reminding us, if you literally have an unstable president who can't be reached by anybody and has access to the nuclear codes. You hope that somebody, whoever there may be, that can throw their body in between Trump and the nuclear arsenal at the last moment would be able to say, obviously this guy is unstable. No, we can't actually allow this to happen. But that relies on a military command structure that did apparently, at least early on, comply with orders not to relieve the Capitol Police in the siege at the Capitol building. So I don't know. I'm not so sure. And who knows what kind of damage can be done in the meantime. Although, I guess, just arguing on the other hand here, I'll just throw out here, if the president is, mentally unstable and incapacitated, as I would maintain, and I'm not even sure that they haven't at this point drugged him into a medically induced coma. I would, if it were my job to supervise this guy. But if all of his cabinet officers are resigning and senior aides are resigning, or senior aides are disappearing, for whatever reason, and everybody's incommunicado, and he's been banned from Twitter and not banned, not yet, but he's locked out of and possibly banned from other social media platforms. He can't come out and speak for himself. Maybe there's not that much that he can do. Maybe they're just sort of keeping him in isolation and just saying, generally speaking, I don't know. Nobody talks to the president without clearing it through me, the sort of Al Haig kind of thing, declaring himself in charge at the White House. And it's now just sort of generally known there will be no valid orders coming from this president. So forget about it. And then he just walks around and mumbles, and they wait to impeach him. But anyway, yeah, that's the Jim Scudo report. Catherine Clark says, tells CNN, House will move forward with impeachment vote against President Trump by middle of next week, if not removed by VP and cabinet, I guess, first. But again, apparently no movement on that front. Pence unwilling to do it for whatever reason, or at least unwilling to say that he's doing it. Cabinet officers resigning. Apparently, John Bolton inserted himself back into affairs yesterday in telling people something like that he wasn't going to be communicating with anybody about using the 25th Amendment, remaining cabinet officers, because at some point he heard from Trump, I guess back when he was in government, that, it's come up a lot, and that Trump said that if he got wind of an effort to relieve him via the 25th Amendment, he would fire all his cabinet officers who were involved in it, and thereby render their signatures on whatever documents, render their decision to remove him moot by removing them as secretaries and relieving them of the power to relieve him of his power. I'm not certain that's how it would actually work, but no one knows. Lots of questions surrounding the execution of the 25th Amendment, and a lot of people saying, what about all these cabinet officers who are resigning now? If shouldn't they stay and invoke the 25th Amendment? Lots of speculation that they are, of course, resigning so that they don't have to be prevailed upon to help invoke the 25th Amendment. But no answer on what it would mean for someone to, say, put their signature to a document attesting that the president was incapacitated and ought to be removed from power, and then getting fired and saying, well, I'm too late. The signature's on there. Or that Elaine Chao is saying, I'm resigning, but effective January 11th, and then I'm going to spend the time, someone would speculate perhaps, spending the time between then and now signing those documents. And then what should the president find out and fire her? She says, you can't fire me, I resign. But before resigning and before being allegedly fired anyway, I signed those documents and the signature is valid. And what if it is possible to fire cabinet officers so that they don't sign these things, or to render their signatures invalid somehow? Or what if they resign ahead of time and there's the 25th Amendment calls for a majority of the principal officers to sign on to this thing? And how do you count? Do acting secretaries count? It's not real clear from the language whether whoever happens to be the most senior officer at the time, and we have succession statutes. Of course, they've been violated several times by this administration, so it's a little difficult to tell who should be in charge, but I'm not certain that the Supreme Court would be terribly interested in upholding a precedent, who knows at this point, or establishing a precedent that the president could prevent his removal under the 25th Amendment, and it is an amendment to the Constitution. That he could void this constitutional power by unilaterally firing everybody who's allowed to exercise. It doesn't seem like there would be any point to a 25th Amendment, the sort of thing that you would think the Supreme Court would find some way around if necessary, but no one has ever brought the question up because we've never been here before. And how do you... And then what about the numbers? A majority of the principal officers. A majority of what? The number that they're supposed to be, or the number that there is now following mass resignations, or firings, or arrests, or whatever you might find happening under this administration? And the answer is no one knows, and no one has ever done this before, and you're just going to have to do what you can do and find out, essentially. Let's see. What else? Let's see. Mad Hatter asking me some interesting questions. Elrond50, who asks us, hey, Kagro X, does the Senate put this guy out to dry as a political price? Or what about him or Cruz? He's talking about Hawley, Senator Hawley, who has run into some trouble of late, as you know. Of course, being a part of this insurrection and raising a fist to them on his way out of the Capitol at some point. So, yeah, Josh Hawley finds himself now without a book deal. He thought he had a deal with Simon & Schuster, or Schuster, how do they say that? I don't know. But apparently, and I'm sure nice big fat advance for a book about nothing in preparation for his run for the presidency, I'm sure. But they canceled his book contract. That was interesting. What else? Top donor. Let's see. Whose tweet has Mad Hatter shared with us here? Aaron McPike, a blue check kind of person. Media and political strategist. So compiling this list here. Hawley problems. Publisher rescinded book deal. Top donor calling for censure. Home state papers, Kansas City Star, and St. Louis Post-Dispatch calling for resignation. Missouri law students calling for resignation. John Danforth, apparently his political mentor, calling his support of him the biggest mistake of his life. And colleagues naturally distancing themselves from him. And Mad Hatter adds, will Cruz likewise be hung out to dry this way? Cruz, as you know, as Greg has reminded us every chance he gets, one of the most unpopular guys in the history of the Senate. And he, too, way out on a limb. And, of course, a great idea at this point would be to get in a Twitter fight with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So he did that. And, of course, she wins it, pointing out that Cruz was sending out fundraising emails and texts while the Capitol was under occupation and while the session had been interrupted and senators were under lockdown. He's sending out fundraising appeals, supporting, continuing to support his efforts on the floor to invalidate electoral college votes during the siege. And remember that, most of the Republicans who said that they were going to be on board with this vote switched their votes very pointedly after the attack on the Capitol. He's still sending out fundraising emails saying, I'm going to stand strong as ever, and you should give me money and support me so that I can support them. And it looks an awful lot like participation in the sedition and treason and the attack plot. And it's not a good look. And it's the sort of thing that, now people are starting to talk about. Would they have the votes to expel people like Hawley and Cruz? No one knows. You need a 2/3 vote to do that, of course, and it's a tall order. But these are some extraordinary circumstances, I would say. Let's see. Another important development here from the South Florida Sun Sentinel, tweeting out a link to their story about the attack on the Capitol under the headline, Pro-Trump rioters smeared poop in U.S. Capitol hallways during belligerent attack. They're not getting good press, these guys. I will say, I would click on the story and read it, but the story appears to be that they smeared poop in U.S. Capitol hallways. I mean, do we need to hear, somebody say, we're going to have a comment from a member of Congress saying, I'm, generally against poop smearing. Hallways really seems like a terrible place to smear poop. We're going to put together a brown ribbon panel to investigate. What do you want to know? The fact is that the newspapers are running a story down in Florida, running the story that the people who came to attack the Capitol are poop smearers. And, of course, they illustrate it with a picture of Viking hat guy bellowing, in the hallway, along with a couple of other, let's say, low-class looking people, to use Donald Trump's phrasing. By the way, also in the picture is guy who got fired from his job. They're now finding, of course, they're identifying everybody's photos and asking the public for help in identifying the people in the photos. Of course, they're all anti-maskers, so none of them have their faces covered, and they had a perfect opportunity to get away with that. They didn't take it because they're idiots. But so next to him in the picture, next to Viking helmet guy, is a picture of a guy who very famously yesterday lost his job. How did they identify him and figure out where he worked so that he could be pressured and the company could be pressured into firing him? The answer is he is photographed wearing his work ID on a lanyard that has the name of his company on it. So now you zoom in, you got his name. Zoom in and look at the lanyard and see where he works. Make the match, call the company, and he's fired. He's one of several from around the country that this is happening to. And as we mentioned yesterday, several from around the country who are already known to internet sleuths and people who have run into them or had run-ins with them over the years, helping the authorities identify them. They're beginning to be rounded up and charges are being filed in various jurisdictions against them. So, things not going all that well, sadly, for the poop smearers who invaded the U.S. Capitol yesterday. All right. Let's see. Other items of interest. Let's jump back to Pocket. I think it's just going to be like headline reading today. What else can we really fit in? I guess I can say this. Short debate on Twitter this morning. I discovered, getting ready for the show, I woke up our Twitter machine here and asked what was going on, only to stumble into a Twitter discussion that I then went to elevate to an argument between Greg and Armando and someone else whose name I didn't immediately recognize over the question of whether or not you can be impeached if you have left office. Here on this show, the answer is yes, and everybody knows it. Also, the rest of reality. But the person they were arguing with was pushing back that, the background of all this, of course. William Belknap, impeachment in 1876. Secretary of War under Ulysses Grant, who was caught up in a scandal and resigned and was afterwards impeached. Now, the guy was pushing back and saying, well, that, as he put it, that impeachment failed. That is shorthand for the Senate voted not to convict him, and so therefore there's no precedent established by it, but not really the case. And of course, the impeachment didn't fail. The Senate wouldn't have it. Pardon me. The Senate wouldn't have that case in its hands if the impeachment had failed. But I think he was just using the vernacular and saying, well, okay, so the conviction is what failed. But part of that case was that the Senate actually paused before taking up the trial and considered explicitly the question of whether or not the resignation rendered the whole thing moot. And they decided very explicitly that it did not. And then they went ahead with the trial. Now, in the end, the best argument that this was somehow invalidated is that they voted not to convict, and that, two, at least some of the senators said in the end that the resignation, in their view, really did make the whole thing pointless. And so that, why bother with going through with trying to decide what the punishment would be or whether we bar him from office. It's pretty clear that he's not going to be a federal office holder in the future. These back in the days when people truly believed that being shamed out of government like that would be the end of your political career. And that's no longer clearly the case these days. But I guess the argument is, well, at least one or two senators said that they were casting their votes not to convict because they viewed the whole thing as pointless. But it's too late. The Senate, speaking as the Senate, considered explicitly the question of whether or not they were permitted to undertake this trial at all. And they decided and left behind the precedent that no, they were not precluded from putting someone on trial for impeachment despite the fact that they had left office. And that's as clear as day. And you can read the debates about it and get a flavor for who thought what about it. But at the end of the day, when the Senate spoke as the body, it was to say that it is not now, nor should it ever be, considered moot. An impeachment should not be considered moot merely by resignation. You shouldn't be able to duck this because there are still penalties post official, I don't know, after you've left your post, obviously. But I don't know how to express that now. Post what? But at any rate, the point is that there are still penalties that they might want to impose on you, i.e. barring you from future federal office. And the presence of that penalty in the constitutional, mandate about what could happen to those impeached from office had to have been placed there for some reason, or certainly wasn't placed there by accident. And because it is clearly something that could be imposed on people, whether they left office voluntarily or not, or whether they were still in office or not, it was no accident. It was very clearly an invitation to keep the door open to impeaching officials who had resigned. And that was the decision of the Senate. Still some pushback from this person who has said, well, no, the courts have never ruled on this, and they may see things differently. But I think that's also a misunderstanding of the dynamics here. The prerogative here is for the Senate to, is a constitutional one. The right of the Senate and the House to determine the rules of their own proceedings. Period. That's just not a reviewable power under most people's understanding of separation of powers in the Constitution. And for a court to step in and say, yes, the Senate decided for itself that it would not moot impeachment trials based on resignation, but we think they should have. And we over here in Article 3 say that the folks over in Article 1 don't have the right to set this rule of proceeding for some reason. I don't think that was ever going to fly. Although, again, Armando and I are always the first to say that courts, especially the Supreme Court, are going to be pretty outcome driven on things like this, and they could be driven by partisanship. And I suppose if there were a partisan situation where it inured to their benefit to rule otherwise and to simply declare themselves to have the power to invalidate a plenary constitutional prerogative of the legislature, they would say it. But I don't know how many people would necessarily obey it. I don't know to what effect they might say such a thing. But even so, I would say even under circumstances, certainly under circumstances like today's when Republican senators who are clearly political actors back off from their political stunt under the pressure of the moment, you'll probably find there aren't a lot of judges out there or Supreme Court justices who would go that far out of their way, certainly not to save Trump at this point. I suppose it's possible to imagine a situation in some other time, some other president where a highly partisan opposing party-dominated Congress sought to, I don't know, do what, but still, even I guess it came down to impeaching a president who had left office, I can't see where the Supreme Court finds an interest in blocking that from happening, much less legal support for blocking it from happening. Anyway, interesting discussions as always. But yeah, thinking about marketing some Ask Me About William Belknap buttons and selling them around Capitol Hill as a way of generating some awareness of the fact that that case exists. I did see Olivier Knox point that out also yesterday, just responding to a tweet of mine saying, at which I just was talking about the fact that you could be impeached even after leaving office, and saying, looking forward to Belknap Twitter this weekend. So it should be an exciting time. But I'm glad we've been talking about it for so long, and enough people are armed with that information that you can engage in frontline discussions with people pushing back on the idea of the ability to impeach a resigned president or a removed via the 25th Amendment president. All right. What else do we need to catch up on? You know what? Maybe we can shift away a little bit. There are a couple of things from like pre-insurgency that I thought might be of some interest. I guess I can quickly throw one or two of these out as we approach the top of the hour break. I thought an interesting observation from Dave Weigel, who was pointing out, how do we get around to this? This is kind of a tough segue. Well, the newly elected Republican members of the House, some of whom are, of course, Q loons, but, various other colorful elements. And, of course, they have their own popular followings as well, outside of even their regular constituency in their House districts. Lauren Boebert, I think, chief among them, but there are a couple of others like that. But Lauren Boebert and others have made an overt attempt to cast themselves, and this is what conservatives do with everything. Anytime that there's a successful, liberal, progressive something that catches fire and has, generates some popularity, they decide that they want to do a conservative version of it. So what do we have here? A conservative version of The Squad has to, of course, be launched. And Lauren Boebert has to be at the center of it because she's got a gun and she's going to force you to put her at the center of it because she has rights. And that's all. Just exercising my rights to force you to do the things I want you to do. So she's cast herself as the leader of a conservative squad or an anti-squad or something like that. And Dave makes a good observation about the qualitative difference. And this is usually the case, just as Red State as a conservative Daily Kos or Conservapedia as a conservative, which was not necessary, Wikipedia, or, what else? A Red Act Blue, or various other attempts at things along the way. There's innumerable attempts at this. But look at the qualitative results. Even if you're not an AOC fan or a Squad fan and you think that they have no qualitative results to look at, still, I think Weigel puts it quite correctly. And I hope we're pronouncing his name correctly after all this time. I have met him a couple of times in person, run into him a lot at Netroots Nation and other things. It's been a long time since I did, but he's just David. So, we don't really deal with last names. And I don't even know whether we necessarily deal with names. We just sort of know each other by sight. At least we did back in the day. Anyway, but I think he makes the right comparison here. Check this out. This is, he says, actually a pretty good study in how the squad and the anti-squad, for lack of better terms here, approach governing. And after all, that's their job, right? Even the worst critics of AOC and the squad recognize that though they are not governing per se at this point, that they're aiming at it in some way, maybe not the most efficient way in their view, but still. So here's how he puts it. AOC's first clash with the establishment was trying to create a Green New Deal committee, right? And everybody thought, oh, pie in the sky. and to a certain extent true, right? Even the Green New Deal itself, pie in the sky perhaps, but a great ideal. The idea here is she's approaching, or she's using pressure tactics that some people don't approve of. Why, though? Why? To create a massive push for climate legislation, but like, revolutionary level climate legislation to address the, revolutionary level problem of climate change. But even if you disagreed, you could at least say, all right, what is it all about? It's about climate legislation. On the other hand, Boebert's big splash, her first big confrontation with her party's establishment and the establishment outside of party structure, was about what? Demanding to carry her Glock around D.C. and in the Capitol. A personal vendetta, if you will. This is about me and what I want to do to keep myself safe or make myself happy. Of course, she could aim at, and her supporters will say, well, no, it's about preserving the right to protect yourself. It's a Second Amendment. It's right in the Constitution. It's a constitutional prerogative. It's clearly much bigger than that. Well, yes and no. I mean, I don't think at any point that AOC was saying that she was not only demanding a Green New Deal committee, but that she be the chairman of that committee and that this all be centered around her. Although you could argue this is about gun rights in general, the video came out, and what's the video about? It's about her and her carrying a Glock in D.C. I thought that was a good comparison. And I guess another good argument about why it is that really conservatives develop your own things, work on your own projects, develop your own persona. It's not ever really going to work to imitate anybody else. It's not because progressives have some particular magic. It's just that it's their magic and you can't steal it or copy it. And you're just going to have to come up with your own thing. I mean, it's not like it's beyond you. Put on an eye patch. That seems to have worked for, what's his name, from Texas. Got him on Saturday Night Live, and now everybody thinks he's a serious person to be paid attention to when, in fact, he's cosplaying as a pirate. I understand how he lost the eye and all that, but I mean, he's got a glass eye. He doesn't wear that. He wears the eye patch because he's involved in cosplay. That's the bottom line of it. All right, we'll take another break. Maybe we'll be more organized in the second hour. I don't know. Let's find out. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I don't imagine I certainly didn't think of any way to become more organized in the second hour, although maybe we'll spend some time reading some of the articles and borrowing the organization of others who have taken the time to write down their thoughts and all that. So Rebecca Romans has got a question here. What are the anti-squad calling themselves? It's a good question. No one knows. Her suggestion, Q-Bert or the Q-Tillion. I don't know. Weigel suggests that it's anti-squad, but that might be just something that he threw on there. And there's no article attached. He's using Matthew Gertz's tweet of January 5th about this, who said Fox and Friends is doing its best to turn the QAnon caucus members, and they don't call themselves the QAnon caucus. They still deny that they're QAnon people, by the way. They just say, well, they have some good points, which they don't. But so, and that's the tip-off. If you are saying about QAnon, well, they have some good points, you're a QAnon nut, because they don't have any good points, and the fact that you would say they do is the giveaway here. Like that other first-term member who spoke at the rally at the Ellipse the other day and was on tape saying, there's some context to it, but who cares, because some of the words in the middle of the context were Hitler was right. So that's the context. I was going to say the rest of the stuff is the context, but now once you say Hitler was right, that becomes the context. So anyway, that one was, I don't know, did we call her name out loud on the show the other day? I don't think so, but maybe not. She, as I recall, was from Illinois, 5th district. There's a 5 in there somewhere. How many districts does Illinois have? Do they have 15? She might be the 15th district. I don't know. Anyway, I guess we could look it up. All right. You want to do that? Do you want facts or something like that? Illinois 15th. Let's see. Yeah, I guess they do have it. They should. There's a sizable state. 15th Congressional District. Yeah, there we go. All right. That brings up NBC Chicago. State lawmakers call on Illinois Congresswoman who invoked Hitler to resign. Mary Miller. That's her name. And whatever. She's got a nice Aryan hairdo. And I don't know whether she's pro-Hitler or just an idiot. But she didn't start off on the right foot. Let's see. Truro Renfro, whose dryer is in now apparently synced up over Bluetooth over the radio with Greg's dryer or washer or what have you, says, what about Lauren Boebert here? Anti-squad nut job. Again, why didn't she stop Wednesday's insurrection? That's a good question. I wondered about that myself. I thought that the only thing that can stop domestic terrorists with guns is a QAnon congresswoman with a gun. My view of it was, of course, that the real problem was that QAnon had planted infiltrators inside the House chamber, and they may who knows, they may have believed that Lauren Boebert and possibly Marjorie Taylor Greene were going to start shooting from inside the House, so to speak. Well, it's true, it would be the House, and open the doors for them, that they would sneak up behind these Capitol police officers who had barricaded the doors and were pointing guns at the windows and disarm them so that the insurgents could get in. But they didn't. That's a good point. Notice that they seem to have disappeared. But she may argue that because the Capitol Police and Metropolitan Police and Sergeant-at-Arms have forbidden her from carrying her Glock on the House floor, that's why this whole thing happened. She could have put a stop to it, but she wasn't able to, and it's their fault. Let's see. Also breaking news from this morning. Saw it earlier, but The Hill, they run their picture posts every 15 minutes or whatever. Dominion Voting Systems has filed its defamation lawsuit against Sidney Powell. So that's proceeding. I'll mark that for inclusion in Pocket and get back around to sharing with you after the show. Let's see, jump back in. But why does Truro Renfro identify Lauren Boebert as a QAnon wacko? Let's see, what is she tweeting here? At a time where we want our country to unify, talk of using the 25th Amendment or entering into expedited impeachment proceedings is the last thing we need. It's actually the first thing we need, so she's wrong. Either Democrats are going to be honest about calls for unity, or they will continue to do this rhetoric. Can't do both. Well, that's stupid. I think the country would be happily unified under Mike Pence as President of the United States for a brief period of time. What's non-unity about that? Well, Lauren Boebert, not really a big-time thinker, but big enough for the folks in Colorado, I guess. She's been provided with the text that invokes things like the words amendment or expedited, and now she sounds like an intellectual, and they're going to accept that, and whatever. I guess I should mark this story about Mary Miller. I can't believe that's just... I feel like I'm making that name up, but it's not. I mean, it's common enough. It's just whatever. Anyway, I'll mark that story for including in the roundup as well, the story of state lawmakers calling for her to resign. I don't think that's going to be effective anytime soon, but it's a good call nonetheless. Let's see. What other things? Are there others that from pre-attack that deserve inclusion? I don't know. Let's see. There's some interesting stories about some vaccine stories. Remember the vaccine? Remember the pandemic? We're still having that. Some validation for my Dunkin' Donuts dumpster diving distribution plan for the vaccine. People who happen to be, I think, in a supermarket where they have a supermarket pharmacy, happen to be shopping late at night and are approached by the pharmacist who has, a giant food pharmacist. When you say things like that and you realize the regional, the different regional supermarket chains, there's a lot of places where you don't have giant supermarkets. That's the brand name. I mean, all supermarkets are pretty big, I'm not saying my supermarket is bigger than your supermarket or can beat up your supermarket. I'm saying the name is Giant. Then they thought they were clearing things up by calling themselves Giant Food. And then it was like, well, Giant Food, is that like the kind that Rodney Dangerfield likes in Back to School? I hate small food. Right? When he's at the party at his house before he decides to go back to college with Jason. Oh, we're getting off track. But that's what it's called, Giant Food. And then, of course, you say, I'm reading you the article. Here in the Washington, D.C. area, it makes instant sense. But if your supermarkets are, Ralph's and whatever else you have, and Ralph's is the only one I can remember, like that's West Coast. But yeah, whatever. So I'm reading to you about, here's this guy, David McMillan. David McMillan is not a first responder or a healthcare worker. So even he was surprised when a Giant Food pharmacist, that's how it should be said, a Giant Food pharmacist asked him and his friend if they wanted to get the Moderna vaccine. And I'm just imagining the rest of the country. What is a Giant Food pharmacist? What's a food pharmacist at all? Are you talking as like a holistic healer of some kind that doesn't use pharmaceutical drugs but heals you with, mashed yams or whatever? No, it's the pharmacy in the Giant brand supermarket. I know you all understand that now. It's just very weird that has to be explained this way. Anyway, so he's shopping in a Giant Food supermarket. And around here in the Washington, D.C. area, because we have no national distribution plan for the vaccines and no national health system to administer them, they decided best we can do is give it to private pharmacies, and they can give it out like they do the free flu shot. And I don't know how they'll schedule the whole stupid thing, but that's not our problem, and we don't care. And again, this is the administration of Donald Trump. We don't give a damn whether the vaccine gets distributed or not. So anyway, private pharmacies have it here, and around here, lots of pharmacies inside the supermarket. It's not necessarily the case everywhere, but it is here. And they were basically walking down the aisle in the supermarket, and the pharmacist approached them. And let's see. She turned to us, he says, this is a quote, and was like, hey, I've got 2 doses of the vaccine, and I'm going to have to throw them away if I don't give them to somebody. We close in 10 minutes. Do you want the Moderna vaccine? He says in his TikTok video about the whole situation, because of course it involves TikTok. How could it not? It's the only way they get you news these days. McMillan didn't hesitate. The law school student said he posted the video of him getting the injection to help spread facts about the vaccine. I think, again, wording. Just don't spread anything at this point. But okay, spread facts about the vaccine, ease concerns and dispel myths and rumors, but not help the editors express themselves. But okay. The post received hundreds of thousands of views and thousands of comments. It's important that when there's so much misinformation swirling that people be able to see that this is a good thing. This is a positive thing. We should be excited about being able to deal with the pandemic, McMillan said. So, of course, all kinds of reactions, and some people saying, well, but if you're not a healthcare worker, you shouldn't be stealing the vaccine from anybody. Again, this is one of those situations where there's X number of doses in a vial, but once you draw out the first dose, you start the clock on this vaccine that's in the vial. It has to be, used up in a certain amount of time, or else it becomes ineffective. It goes bad, essentially. So she's saying, look, I'm just going to end up having to throw this out. The pharmacy closes in 10 minutes. There may be 2 hours of life left on this vial, but we're not going to be here to administer it. And quick thinking, I think the right way to do it. And I guess apparently they now have the okay from the D.C. area health authorities to handle things this way. If they have a couple of doses left at the end and no one else scheduled according to the actual distribution calendar to get those shots, or the people aren't showing up, they just say, this vaccine does us all a lot more good in someone's arm than in the garbage. And I think that's the wise approach. Meanwhile, again, reports from New York are that Governor Cuomo is forcing people to go the other way and forcing vaccine to be disposed of in those situations rather than give people the vaccine out of schedule. And I know that the argument, I guess, was, well, that would encourage people to cheat the system perhaps somehow by, claiming, well, I didn't have, I had these extra doses of vaccine and I just happened to give them to my friends and family. and that might create some suspicion. But of course, on the other hand, if you really found yourself in the situation that this pharmacist found themselves in, and you approached somebody, let's say, and they said they weren't interested in getting the vaccine for whatever reason, you might say, well, this stuff is going to waste. Who can I call? Who can I rely on to come and receive this vaccine? And guess what? It'll probably be friends and family who actually know you and trust you and understand what you're trying to do. So it's not necessarily nefarious that it ends up in the arms of your friends and family either. You would have to investigate these things closely. I suppose the reverse could possibly be true, that if Andrew Cuomo and I sat down, he might be able to give me a good pitch for why it's better in everyone's interest in the long run to throw that vaccine away. But I guess he's busy, or maybe I'm too busy, and we haven't had that discussion yet. But it seems to me like they need to be doing something different with whatever vaccine is left. And I think certainly most people on Twitter seem to agree. All right. Another breaking story here. Speaker Pelosi has ordered flags at the U.S. Capitol be flown at half staff in honor of Capitol Police officer who I mentioned to you earlier, who did die. His name is Brian Sicknick, as it happens. He died from injuries sustained while engaging against rioters on Wednesday. I'm not exactly certain of the circumstances there. I read an article, a quick brief on it, but it doesn't clarify either whether, for instance, was he injured, but then, did he die of the injuries? Was it a head injury or something? Or a fire extinguisher? Okay. Did they hit over the head with the metal part of it as opposed to hit that fire with a fire extinguisher? You hit him? All right. So, yeah, it could be traumatic brain injury then. That killed him. Okay. Yeah, that's the part I read, that he went back to the station and collapsed, and it made it sound like, well, I don't know what his injury is. And then he went back to the station and collapsed. Did he collapse because he also had a heart condition and was distressed about having been injured, or no, apparently not. So, okay. Thanks to the production staff in the background. I appreciate it. Have another Coke as a reward. That was good reporting.
You missed a lot of good joke opportunities for Vagina.
Hey, man. I'm going to have to bleep these jokes now.
And
yeah.
Also, owned by Giant Royal
Oh, yeah. I think I've discussed that on the air before, but it's been a couple of years, so maybe new listeners. I guess while we were, it's true. I thought about it again, but I was like, now I'm going to be spending 10 minutes on the name of giant food, and I feel like that's a waste of time. But it's Friday, so why not? But maybe those of you who are longtime listeners will remember that here in Virginia, our local supermarket, our closest supermarket is Giant. We now have every other supermarket under the sun, except Ralph's, which isn't here, close by. We got the Whole Foods not that far away. There's a Harris Teeter. There's Safeway. There's now the new guys, the Lidl, and what's the Lidl rival? Aldi, right? Yeah. So they're all here. Anyway, yeah, now Mighty OCD said we should just mic you up at this point. I was thinking of ordering another microphone anyway. I should just put one at your desk. There's no reason why you could, except for the fact that you're working. But it could be like it's like Robin Quivers. You're in the other room, but... Well, you want to be Howard Stern? I'll be Robin Quivers. But it seems like I'm doing too much work for Robin. But anyway, I don't know. Is that bad?
No, it's fine.
Okay, it doesn't sound like it's fine. Okay, anyway, but pointing out, yeah, so you'd rather be Fred? Okay, that's true. I'll give you the soundboard. I need somebody to do that. All right, yeah, all right, fine, I don't know. Yes, and sexist, I've said you're Robin Quivers, and all right. Well, I don't know. Anyway, all right, Fred, there's a lot of other worse people, I understand, I could make you be. Anyway, so here we are in Virginia, where our local supermarket is Giant. And I think I've told this story before, but because it struck me as so ridiculous and funny. Anyway, the receipts that print out after you buy something, the first time I saw it, down at the bottom that says, which credit card you used, and they blank out the numbers. Where was this receipt from? And their computers are programmed to print out, in shorthand at the bottom of the receipts that you were shopping at. I don't know, maybe the company keeps track of its stores and divides its divisions this way. We're in a Virginia Giant, and they abbreviated Virginia, as we do in the mail code, VA, and then giant. And it was, I don't know if the kerning was proper or whether there was a space there or the two things ran together, but it has the effect of putting at the bottom of your receipt that you've been shopping at Vagiant, which is, it strikes you in a quick glance as a little bit odd. And I know my mother got a big kick out of that, but so, we always call it the Vagiant that we're going to. And that's one. And then, of course, we learned at some point that Giant Food is owned by an international conglomerate. I know I've mentioned this on the show too. A Dutch company. And you know how they work, like the Shell company. Not the actual name of the company, Shell, not a shell company like an LLC, but Shell, the oil and gas company, is originally anyway Royal Dutch Shell. So they put the Royal in front of everything for these Dutch companies, and this is a Dutch conglomerate that owns the Giant Food, and it's, in their pronunciation, Ahold, a holding company. I don't know why what the A is, but Ahold, and that's kind of funny right alongside Vagiant. And what's next to Vagiant? The Ahold is next to the Vagiant in the corporate listings. But together, of course, the company, I guess, is now formally known as, it is Giant, and it's a subsidiary of Royal Ahold. Giant Royal Ahold. I'm like, well, now that's Ted Cruz you're talking about again. We've circled back around. Ted Cruz, Giant Royal Ahold, or Ahold, as we might pronounce it here. All right. So now you know a lot more. Okay. I have permission now. Karen says, please spend more time on metro area supermarket chains. It's clearly entertaining. And it's a lot better news than the fact that the president is insane and incommunicado, and we don't know what's happening with the vice president, or really, honestly, whether either of them are alive at this point. I'm asking for proof of life from these guys, and when they speak next, I guess, what's his name? Trump, that guy who's president. I guess he put out a video somehow yesterday. He must have used somebody else's social media account to do it. But yeah, next time he does a video, I think I'm going to kind of demand, I need to hold up a copy of today's newspaper, because I am not 100% certain that these are videos that are, not hostage situation things, or that you're just out of it or whatever. I don't know when they were made. He seemed to be referring to the events of the day, but not clearly enough for anybody to say he's clearly apologizing for them in any way, anyhow. But I guess he's back on Twitter. Is that right? Is his 12-hour lockdown over with? I just saw Armando commenting on something of his. So I guess Trump is back and commenting again, but it's not helping anything. And he's not using his account to tamp down on things either. Let me see. I should put away this copy of the video I told you about from Donald Trump Jr. yesterday, so you can watch the weird dynamics going on in that tent as well. Man, all right. Let's see. Switching back here. Was there anything else that was pre-invasion of the Capitol that I needed to share with you? No, I think we went through his the rumor that he might be heading to Scotland, and the Scottish putting a damper on that one, saying he won't get through their COVID lockdown, but I'm not entirely sure that's really true. They might just not stop a American military aircraft from landing there. Let's see. Other things. We're now back to Raffensperger and the call. We never really, I did talk enough about the call. I'm glad that's being brought up in the impeachment articles, because it's so easy to forget that just happened, and that it's so extraordinarily important, and it ought to be, really was grounds for impeachment all by itself. So I'm glad that they are including that, because again, his flooding the zone with garbage really is one of his superpowers, and that should not be forgotten. Let's see. Okay, there are definitely a couple of other stories that I think are worth mentioning that are prior to the attack. Sort of a glancing through all of them. One of them was about David Perdue, but he's over and done with at this point. It was just sort of interesting last-minute story, that the Washington Times, or New York Times, rather, had reported. I'll just give you the headline. You'll get the idea here. Before embracing America First agenda, David Perdue was an outsourcing expert, or at least held himself out as an outsourcing expert, shipping jobs overseas to help companies, lower their bottom line, et cetera, et cetera. And then he turned into a day trader / United States Senator. It was of some interest, but now that he's a thing of the past, I guess it's not necessarily worth pausing and talking about. But there are a couple other things that I think are of interest. Let's go with this one. Another AOC reference, and another interesting contrast in the fight in which I try not to involve myself between AOC and others aligned with her and more outspoken outside elements like, what's his name? The other comedian, podcaster guy who now his name escapes me entirely, who's been pressing for, force a vote on Medicare for all. I know his name too. We mentioned it yesterday, and now I'm blanking on it. I'm kind of happy about that. Anyway, this was an interesting contrast between generally what people like AOC are able to do versus what outside agitators are able to do. But outside agitators too can educate themselves to learn to do things like this, which has kind of been the goal of any organizing efforts I've ever been involved in trying to make things happen in Congress. And like I think you've noticed, AOC growing on me over time, and I'm gaining a lot more respect for how she's approaching things because, she's moving more towards the stuff where I'm more comfortable. It should be no surprise that it makes me more comfortable to see her becoming more involved in procedure and insider operations, but at the same time explaining to everybody else who's following along what she's doing. So, of course, we talked a little bit about the big fight about forcing a vote and whatnot, and the tactics that outside agitators are using to try to discredit Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in particular as a sellout and doesn't know what she's doing and can't get anything done. There's been a very interesting development in the House rules, and I think we mentioned it a little bit, discussed it a little bit when Joan was on, that it seems very esoteric that they managed to get into the new rules package exceptions from pay-go or pay-as-you-go provisions. A long time sore point for people who, have been watching how laws are made and how governing is done. People like David Dayen knows very clearly, I think, what's going on with this. And we've all, if you've been around long enough, have documented the times when progressive initiatives have been stopped in their tracks by objections that they would violate the pay-as-you-go provisions, which many progressives, as a result, consider to be a self-own or an own goal, perhaps, if that's your preferred terminology, that Democrats keep imposing on themselves in the rules. It's a fiscal discipline measure that, insists that new initiatives be, find pay-fors in order to be considered in order for consideration in the House. And especially in light of all the explanations we've gotten, say, from Arliss Bunny, and for instance, who just contacted me the other day to say hi and ask some questions. But what we learned from her about modern monetary theory, and even if you're not a modern monetary theory adherent, just in general saying, look, there are some things that are worth spending some money and incurring some debt on. And as we've seen, Republicans don't care about the national debt when they do what they want to do, which is tax cuts for rich people or wasteful spending on stupid border walls or what have you. Why do you limit yourself? And I guess that gets us back to the same argument we always have between the Abigail Spanbergers of the world and not even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but pretty much everybody else, that that, yeah, you're handicapping yourself by saying, well, we don't want to give conservatives anything to latch onto to attack us with, so we're going to be fiscally disciplined too. And it doesn't net any rewards. It just means you can't enact anything, because there's no point at which conservatives will ever become convinced that, you know what, you really are being pretty fiscally disciplined, and we should stop calling you all socialist, communist thieves and spendthrifts and tax and spend liberals. That never happens. So why handicap yourself? Why not at least give yourself the advantage of a policy position to run on? But Abigail Spanberger, of course, comes in and says, well, you can't have a policy position to run on because that doesn't work for me in my district. I win without policies. You should too, for whatever reason. Anyway, we'll get back to it. That's not really what it's about after this. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Lots more happening. Yeah, I now see Trump's tweet being sent around. It's all about him, of course. Blah, 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 75 million. Great American patriots voted for me, something, something. It's insubstantive, generally speaking, not really worth discussing. But lots of other interesting stories out here, including, not related to what I mean to be talking about here, but let me just retweet this one for you. Texas woman, this is the New York Post, Texas woman flew on private jet to Washington, D.C. to, quote, storm the Capitol because economic anxiety, I guess. Something, something, blah, blah, blah. Oh, yeah, well, that's the comment to make on it, too, right? Didn't do it. Let me get back, though, to where I was a moment ago about AOC. Oh, and I should have looked up the story of the name of the I still can't remember the name of the weirdo guy who's constantly screaming at her about all of this stuff. Let's see. Oh, and another question. I guess before I jump into the AOC thing, I'll answer this question because this more relevant to our usual wheelhouse. Albert Titus asking if there is a 50-50 split in the Senate, as there will be. Obviously, the vice president can settle, can break ties, but is she a, quote, member of the Senate? That's an interesting question, and this relates to his earlier question here, which he attaches. Maybe this has been discussed, but will there really be a Senate majority leader? Doesn't this imply that there's a majority in the Senate? And the answer is yes, and they've done this before. The Senate has been 50-50 within relatively recent memory when, what was the name of it? Was it Jim? What was his name? From Vermont, too. Was it Jim Jeffords? This is not so old that I can't remember. Yeah, Jim Jeffords. He switched. He was a Republican from Vermont, senator, and in the wake of, I don't even remember what exactly triggered it anymore. But, all right, I'll look it up in Wikipedia. And tell you that. May 24th, 2001, Jeffords left the Republican Party and became an independent. And more than became independent, he caucused with the Democrats. That brought the Senate from 51-49 Republican to 50-50. And they had to work things out as to what this was, how this was going to work. But yes, they basically said, in effect, any question of procedure or what a ruling, might be on the floor for how the Senate should proceed on some question or another would be settled by vote, and that if the vice president were, if they needed to, they could schedule it such that the vice president were available to break the tie. And at the time, the president, I can't even recall exactly how this worked out, but they needed, and maybe this was slightly different now that I think about it, the way the Jeffords thing went. But the upshot of it is that in our situation, should they need to break a tie, they can have Kamala Harris there. And if the question is on a ruling from the chair, I know this seems a little bit, there's something inherently unfairish feeling about giving the vice president who's presiding over the Senate as president of the Senate a vote in overruling or sustaining her own ruling. But that happens all the time when the Senate or when the Senate president pro tem is in the chair, or some other someone else substituting for the president pro tem. That senator gets to vote in the question of whether or not his own ruling should stand. So it's not terribly far removed from regular everyday procedure. But at any rate, the upshot of it is that everybody recognizes that anytime they bring Kamala Harris in, there's an effective majority for the Democrats. And so it will be Chuck Schumer, or whoever the Democrats designate anyway, as majority leader. And there's no real great issue with doing that either. And that's how they did it when Jeffords switched. And as we've discussed, there's no particular magic that goes along with being majority leader except for preferential recognition. And that's all a matter of convenience, that if they needed to settle the question at any point of who should be recognized or who should be setting the floor schedule, they would vote, and they would vote along party lines. And if necessary, they'd bring in the vice president and they would win. And everybody acknowledges that. And so to save time, we just say, fine, you're the majority. That's the way it's going to work. And thank you, by the way, for the name I was missing, who has sent me this one. Mars Farmer 75. Thanks very much. Jimmy Dore. That's the guy. Ex-comedian who does a, quote, left populist YouTube show. Yells a lot, most often at minorities. That's unfortunate. And or women on the left. That's kind of what I hear. Back to, oh yes, and there's Asparagus Zucchini giving me the Jimmy Dore thing too. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate this. We should all I should send you all microphones, basically. Although I don't know if we'd ever get the show done that way. But who cares? You'd be having a good time. So, do we need anything more than that? I don't think so. Anyway, man, what else were we going to say? Karen asked, can Harris introduce bills on the Senate floor? That, I think the answer is no. She's not a senator. And it does create a weird dichotomy. Maybe not. Maybe more. There's maybe more cotomies than just two. So can you have a trichotomy? I don't know. I guess so. Why not? Right? The vice president is an odd creature. She's not a senator, but she gets a vote, but only in the case of a tie. And that would include cases of a tie and a question of her own rulings. And I know this came up. Joan was asking me the other day as she was trying to help some other folks at Daily Kos straighten out some questions. What about like on executive appointments, for instance, getting Biden's cabinet in place? If it's tied 50-50, the nomination doesn't, I don't think it passes with just 50-50. She'd have to break the tie. And yes, she could come in and do that. But the question was, does her vote count? Or for, I guess more specifically, the question was, what about on a vote on cloture for the nomination for a cabinet position? Because the old cloture rules, back when it was 60 for a executive appointment or judicial appointment, was that it had to be, that it was the votes of 60 senators duly chosen and sworn, which was constitutional language, which meant basically that it wasn't 60% or more of those present and voting, but it had to be, in fact, 60 senators or more out of the total, or I guess 3/5 of those chosen and sworn. So if there were fewer than 100 senators, you could reduce the number appropriately. But at any rate, the question is, would a vice president have an opportunity to vote in something like that? And the answer for cloture used to be no, because there's no such thing as a tied cloture vote that's worth anything, because you needed 3/5. But now that Senate precedent has been changed via the nuclear option, first in 1975, but everybody tries to pretend that didn't happen. First in 2013 by Harry Reid in changing the threshold for cloture on a nomination for an executive nomination or a judicial nomination up to but not including the Supreme Court, was that a majority would do it. And the question was, what was the language? Did they say 50 senators, the votes of 50 senators? Did they say a vote of the majority of senators? And if they did say a vote of the majority of senators, would the vote of a vice president count? Because she's not a senator per se, right? But then there would even be questions about that. Well, she kind of is in a way, but all right, not chosen as a senator. But you remember when, it puts me in mind of back when Dick Cheney, do you remember when Dick Cheney was vice president? He had a very interesting and unique view, and it was mostly sustained in courts, actually, or unchallenged in the bureaucracy anyway, that the vice president occupied this very weird hybrid position, both in the legislative branch and the executive branch, and that he was therefore some sort of fourth branch. You used to see Marcy Wheeler refer to Dick Cheney, Dick Fourth Branch Cheney, all the time, because he insisted that he occupied this unique position in the legislature, usually to do things like duck the requirements of disclosures required from the executive branch. He would say, well, I'm not the executive branch. For these purposes, I'm legislative branch. And for requirements that they had of the legislative branch, he would pretend to be the executive branch. Anyway, so the vice president's role is weird and malleable. So there's that. But on the question of whether or not she could break a tie on cloture, if the vote was 50-50 and you needed a majority, I think the answer is yes. I looked at the language that was used in the 2013 nuclear option as opposed to the 2017 Mitch McConnell nuclear option that eliminated the 60% threshold for nominations to the Supreme Court, as you all know. And basically it was just this. The proposition of the precedent there was that a majority vote was all that was necessary, and that was the language. It didn't specify senators or anything. So I think he knew what he was doing at the time and meant to leave it as, yes, the vice president can break the tie. So my opinion, and it's only an opinion at this point until we, have that fight and someone appeals the ruling of the chair and Kamala Harris is in the chair and she votes in favor of her own ruling that she can break the tie, and then they say that's not fair, you're judge in your own case, et cetera, and then people push back and say Senate President pro tem votes on his own case all the time, that doesn't bother anybody, and then they decide whether or not there's a significant enough substantive difference between a senator serving as senator or president pro tem and a non-senator serving as presiding officer of the Senate. But I guess it still comes down to she's presiding officer of the Senate, and there's no rule against the presiding officer of the Senate voting on their own rulings. And they've done it 100 million times, and, depending on which side you're on, it bothers you or doesn't, but there's plenty of precedent for it, and that's that. And I think it comes to rest there. Okay, back to, now that I remember or have been reminded of Jimmy Dore's name and AOC. Although now I feel like we should have gone in more into Jim Jeffords. But you should read his Wikipedia entry and whatever articles there are from the time so we can figure out what the context was of that. But yeah, the last time the Senate found itself 50-50, or was it that, now I can't remember whether they were 50-50 and he switched and made it 51-49 or not. But at any rate, the point is they have, the point I want you to I will mention, and so that you can take away with you, is that there's precedent out there that doesn't necessarily have to be followed, but they very carefully constructed their organizing resolutions and adopted new organizing resolutions in May of 2001 to accommodate this new reality. That's how they dealt with it. and it was basically a negotiated settlement between the parties, and that if anything changed, that settlement too allowed for, if anything changed, if senators resigned, died, whatever, and it changed the balance of power, that they would reconvene to renegotiate this thing again. But it's essentially a negotiated settlement between the parties when things are 50-50, and the effective, just like with everything else, the tie is broken by who's the vice president. And if they are affiliated with a party with which they are willing to vote consistently, then it's simply assumed that that's going to be the way these questions are going to come out, and they all recognize that reality. Now, it's interesting. You could just fight it out every time and say, we just refuse to recognize the reality. We're going to make you go through the power exercise of producing the vice president every time. It should be kept in your back pocket, because that's, I guess, if I'm Mitch McConnell and I'm pissed and I want to screw things up, and there's no reason to think that he isn't, except that this attack on the Capitol may have taken the wind out of those sails. That's a possibility. He's an older guy. Maybe he just wants all to be wrapped up and he can retire sometime soon, or have a quiet last term anyway. But he could spend his time screwing with the Biden administration by saying, we don't recognize your majority. Your majority is real when Harris is here. And if you want to pin down the vice president of the United States all the time, every day, here in the Senate, that's fine. We're going to make you do it. If you neglect to do it or think it's unnecessary, we're going to prove you wrong. So I guess that needed to be snuck in there. Let me jump back over. I do feel like I should spend more time on this one. Maybe next week as we approach things. Anyway, the AOC Jimmy Dore thing was where I wanted to jump back to. And the fight over whether or not they could withhold their votes to in the speaker vote and force a vote on on Nancy Pelosi as speaker in exchange for a demand that they get a vote on Medicaid for all, or Medicare for all, I think. Medicare for all on the floor of the House. Okay, thanks. Kate has sent me the screen grab. Is this from Wikipedia or elsewhere? In 2001, the Senate was split 50-50 from January until June. There we go. I knew that didn't make a whole lot of sense as I was recounting this off the top of my head. January to June, the Senate was split 50-50 when Jeffords left the Republican Party and became an independent who caucused with Democrats, giving Democrats control. And I guess, now in thinking about it, it was the period from January to June where they had this negotiated settlement wherein, wherein the Republicans were in control because Dick Cheney was the vice president and president of the Senate. But it was Bill Frist, I guess, at that point, right, who was majority leader. But there was a negotiated settlement on how to deal with committee assignments where the vice president wasn't on hand to break ties. And should committees be split 50-50, or should run over something with my chair here, but should committees be split 50-50, or should there be a Republican advantage on the committees, given that ultimately if they really had to settle any disputes about these things, they could bring it to the floor and Dick Cheney could break the tie in their favor. And my recollection was that in some cases they actually did use a 50-50 allocation on some of the lesser committees, but usually basically they said, no, we're going to treat Republicans as the majority here from, or at least from January going forward. But the reason I bring up the negotiated settlement issue was that, as I recall, the organizing resolution from January included a codicil, essentially, of what would we do if the balance of power changes during the session. And so that the transition to the Senate post-Jeffords switch was relatively smooth, and they didn't have to fight it out. They recognized that this was likely to happen either by someone switching parties or, any one vacancy could tip the balance of power. So they wrote it into the organizing resolution, as I recall. Okay, that's a better picture of things, less confusing and more in keeping with, well, how it actually happened, I guess. Okay, still have a few minutes, I think, to address this situation. So I'll start off just to try and organize things a little bit here with AOC's tweet from when? January 1st of this year, stating, one of the first votes I ever cast broke with my party over House rules that strangled transformative legislation for working people and climate. It was honestly terrifying. That was to say, she voted against the Democratic House rules package at the time because, it didn't include, for instance, the ability to organize a Green New Deal committee, and she wanted it to. And, that's part of the problem. As good an idea as it may have been, or maybe not, you can't show up as a newly elected member on January 3rd and have a great deal of influence on a rules package. It's possible if you're elected and as a member-elect, you know what you're doing. Maybe you're a former staffer, maybe you're a state legislator for a long time, and many of them are. And so they know the value of the rules package and how important it is. But very rarely do they arrive on Capitol Hill knowing that something that is of central importance to them politically there's an obstacle to what they want to do in the rules, and have the ability to reach into the process by which the rules package is formulated prior to their swearing in and have influence on that. So it's a tall order. It's difficult. And so she, in January of 2019, found that, the thing she wanted to do had a fairly serious problem standing in the way. Starting a new committee isn't a matter of snapping your fingers and saying, poof, we have a new committee. There's a procedure and has to be kind of authorized ahead of time. The Rules Committee should write into the rules package that there will be established this new committee, although you can do it after the rules package is adopted. But there were other institutional items, and PAYGO chief among them, I think, though I don't know if she knew it then. But at any rate, she says she did cast her vote, one of her first votes, against the rules package, and it was, she says, honestly terrifying, because, it puts you on bad footing with the leadership right off the bat. She says now CPC, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, has pushed these critical rules changes in House negotiations. I'm grateful, she says, for Congressman McGovern's leadership, Jim McGovern, in this case, chair of the Rules Committee, thanking him for his help on and leadership on this. And she includes the tweet of Ryan Grimm, who I think we mentioned in all of this, who had said, progressives in the House have won a rules change that would allow Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, or other big-ticket agenda items to be exempted from PAYGO. This was a necessary step in opening the way for it. As it turns out, in our discussion with Joan, we found that maybe was too broad of a statement. It appears to be the case, broadly speaking, for the Green New Deal, but on the question of Medicare for all, there's another hurdle and another issue here, which is that I guess PAYGO is being waived, certainly for climate legislation, but also for healthcare legislation with respect to the pandemic and dealing with the pandemic. And you could certainly make the case that, Medicare for all, in my opinion, not mine, but their opinion, maybe mine, I haven't examined it closely enough, is absolutely necessary. It's the only way we're going to get ourselves out of this pandemic, is to treat this as a nationalizing healthcare and moving forward from there. I don't know whether everybody would agree with you, and there'd be a ruling somewhere about, maybe from the parliamentarian initially, about whether or not that fits under this PAYGO exemption. But the point is that the exemption is there. And I'll say it this way, that Jimmy Dore, I am fairly certain, I don't know him that well, I don't know what he's about, I guess, that well, I don't know him at all. I'm fairly certain that Jimmy Dore, or at least Jimmy Dore types, probably never. They probably were told, but they probably never absorbed that PAYGO was standing in the way of this stuff. And even if they did, what to do about it. Not that, not for lack of people like Ryan Grimm having explained it to them, or David Dayen, for that matter, having explained it to them in the past. I just don't think Jimmy Dore actually grasped it. And certainly there's no evidence that he organized anything around pushing for a rules change that could make the Green New Deal and Medicare for All more possible, more plausible on the House floor anyway. Don't know if you could do anything about it in the Senate. But anyway, Ryan makes a generally very good point here that this is a very insidery and unsexy sort of thing to organize around. And so they just don't do it. And it may be that they just don't know that they need to do it. You know, my own work, whenever I'm working on, organizing principles, things like that, that's the angle I tried to bring to it, is that there's, it's not just lingo to say we have an inside-outside strategy. I mean, that's what AOC is talking about here, but we used to use the term all the time in organizing for filibuster reform to say, we got to teach people the ins and outs, the nuts and bolts of legislating enough so that they can't be talked around by legislators or have their ideas dismissed by legislators. We want the Green New Deal. Well, you can't because PAYGO. And then people say, I don't know what that means. And then the legislator says, good, argument won, and walk away. But if you figure out a way around PAYGO, like changing the rules and convincing enough people inside the House to change the rules on PAYGO and making things possible, then that argument is removed. And that's what AOC, it took 2 years to get it done, but that's not a long time, got here. There's more to her tweet thread here. One of the first deep lessons I learned in the House, that process is policy. Hallelujah. I was so glad to see that. If you pass Medicare for All, Green New Deal, etc., with messed up process or rules, then it can be weaponized into austerity by rules requiring it to have insane tax hikes or service cuts tied to it that aren't applied to others. So these rules changes are a big deal, and not only on healthcare. They are structural changes in the House that level the playing field for a full suite of flagship legislation and locks that in for the field, or locks in that field for the next 2 years and establishes precedents for thereafter. This was not easy. And to be 100% honest, it was hard during this period to be targeted and marred as some sort of sellout or enemy of the people over a late tactical disagreement over one floor vote. Also a bummer, by the way, to see figures excuse comments like F her and F anyone who protects her. That's not tone, that's violence. On the one hand, she says, I'm no stranger to abusive rhetoric, and I know that taking knocks comes with being an elected official, but as someone who prioritizes movement building and winning, creating something joyful that people actually want to be a part of is an important organizing principle. But let us celebrate this achievement. We need the energy of celebration to keep pushing. These rules changes are a BFD. Breaking austerity mindset and rules, especially on climate, is a major tenet of the Green New Deal. We will learn, build, and uplift and advance together. And then a Happy New Year wish for everybody. And yes, just sort of a good reminder that that's what it takes to actually change things, is to know where the rules are, what the rules are, and how the rules are changed, and be able to leverage that into reality, as opposed to screaming at people on your podcast that they're sellouts and a-holes, is basically what I'm talking about here. Let me, I'll throw out for you to read along with this the writing of David Atkins, our good friend here in Washington Monthly. House Dems signal bolder action by weakening self-imposed austerity rules. This will give you a much fuller explanation of exactly what was going on here. I should have included David among the list of people who've been writing about this, along with David Dayen and Ryan Grimm. So good backgrounder there, but a good reminder of the importance of organizing for these things and getting it done correctly. I bring that up. I was reminded to bring it up by noticing that there was some discussion about whether or not they could include some sort of effort, either for, I can't remember whether it was for Medicare for All or something else, in a reconciliation bill this year. Everyone remembers the reconciliation process and how it allows you to bypass the filibuster on legislation that still exists in the Senate. And everybody was real excited for that. Here's this sort of reminder, the unsexy organizing principle behind this. In order to get something through the reconciliation process, there needs to be instructions issued ahead of time. You can't just come up with something and say, put it in the reconciliation bill. Remember, it has to be directed by the Budget Committee ahead of time when the budget for the year is prepared, authorizing you to use the reconciliation process to put your provision in. Now, that may be easier to do for flagship progressive legislation this year if it turns out that, as it should, I guess, Bernie Sanders chairs the Senate Budget Committee. But you got to take a look at who's going to be chairing the House Budget Committee. It needs to be in there as well. But the point is, get your requests together now. You should know what you want to put into reconciliation now and make those requests now, because by February, it'll be way too late to ask the budget chairmen in both houses to include those instructions, and you'll miss your opportunity. Does Jimmy Dore know that?
Networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Yeah, I bet he doesn't. And Asparagus Zucchini says he's still losing his mind over AOC. That thanks to his former partner, I think, Sam Cedar, who has been a radio co-host with him for a long time, but now has some extreme problems with him. Anyway, no more of this. It's on to bigger and better things with Justice Putnam next.